Hi everybody, I'm Jeff. As that wonderful introduction, thank you, stated, I am a writer, director, actor, instructor of film at the Jeff Goldberg School of Performing Arts, Jeff Goldberg Studio, and the Chimbai Village Theater. Today I've come all the way here to Kerala to speak with all of you about a whole host of things that have to do with the world that I work in, the performing arts. So let's jump right in. What I wanted to talk to you about today was storytelling. Now, it's kind of one of those big ticket questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is water wet, right? One of those things that's part of the fabric of your life, meaning there's always been stories. They've always been there, right? And you know what they are, you know what they look like, but what are they actually? And why do we tell them? And what makes the human experience so inextricably connected to them? And why do they matter so much to us? Why do we internalize the characters from stories? Why do we internalize stories and assimilate them into the moments of our lives? Why do we do that? And why is that part of who we are, not just as an individual, not just as a society, but as a species? And let's contextualize that. We are not the only species on the planet that use tools. Rhesus monkeys use certain tools to get food out of the ground, right? So we're not special that way. And we haven't been here that long. Sharks, they've been on the planet for 300 million years. And as far as I know, there are no shark storytellers. There's no shark cinema. What makes storytelling such an inexorable part of the human experience? Well, let's start first with a more simple question. What is storytelling? What is it, right? That's the big question. That's the elephant in the room. And storytelling is very simply communication. It is an act of communication. And when we think of communication today, we think of oral, verbal language, the words that come out of our mouth. As a matter of fact, earlier on one of the panels, it was said, words matter, and they absolutely do. But modern spoken language, the way we understand it, is a relatively new invention in the course of human history. So for many, many millennia, we had to communicate with our bodies, with dance, with music. And today, we still use these very same postures, gestures, movements, and songs as a means of communication. And as we listen to them, they transcend understanding and become about something far more important to us, which is emotion and feeling. But I think it's really important to give yourself a simple definition is, what is storytelling? It is communication. And that's where it really starts for me. Because once you say that storytelling is communication, then suddenly it opens up a huge tent under which we could put so many different things, not just fiction, not just movies and books, but also science and math and technology. The whole experience of the human endeavor is actually one great story. And the best thing about that is not just me, but all of us are part of that. We're all communicators and we're all contributing to this wonderful story of humanity. And that, I think, is really important, because once you get past the definition of storytelling, then you arrive at a bit more of a modern word, narrative. Now that's a sticky one, because narrative and storytelling, they go to the same parties, they dress up in the same clothes, but they're not the same thing. And just like was said earlier, words matter, they do indeed. And let's get some definition here. Storytelling is communication. Narrative is how you personally lens the story. How your opinion, how your culture, how your society, how your beliefs, how your experiences become part of how you lens that story through your perspective. And narrative, now that one actually is even more important in some ways to the human experience, particularly the modern person like us. Because out there, companies are giving us narratives. Politics are giving us narratives. Beliefs are giving us narratives. And the thing is that there are so many narratives out there that, you think to yourself, can they all be true? And the funny thing is yes, and the funny thing is no. Which is 2 things, 10 things, 100 things can be true and false at the same time. And if anyone who's familiar with quantum computing or quantum science understands, or quantum physics rather, understands that these dualities are actually the stuff that our universe is made of, and so are our belief systems. So as we endeavor into storytelling and narrative, now that we have this basic language between us, let's jump into something more. How do we tell a story? Can you tell a story well? Is there an art to that? And the answer is yes. And I'll share with you actually something a little bit more homegrown than, the more technical aspects of my work as a filmmaker, which is this. I have an older brother. Any of you have any siblings? Yes or no? Yes, okay, great. Have you ever noticed that you and your sibling are very different? Yes or no? Right, of course, everyone notices that, right? Now I love my brother and he probably will watch this and get very mad at me for saying this, but he's terrible at telling stories. Wonderful guy, very funny, but he's not great at telling stories. And when you try to tell him he's not great at telling stories, he doesn't want to hear that, right? Because everybody thinks they're good at telling stories. Everybody thinks they have a sense of humor, when in fact, telling a story is an art. It's a skill and a craft. And the one thing that a lot of artists don't like to hear about when they start to discuss storytelling is structure. And this, my friends, is actually the single most important thing to being a good storyteller. Understanding structure, the structure of how we build a story, where certain elements go, where certain conflicts go, where certain beats or scenes or sequences go. And this scaffolding of story, my friends, is something that can be learnt, internalized, and then reproduced. And this actually is really where my talk begins today. Because the trouble we have, particularly in my industry, is a lack of storytelling. Now let me break that down for you. Yes, the films today have great VFX. Yes, the films today have wonderful acting and great cinematography. Surely they've improved to the point where everything is so absolutely great you can't even see the difference between, say, a film shot in one country to the next. But what's missing lately, and we all feel this, are stories, are narratives. And what's missing in these stories and narratives is structure. So today I want to talk to you about the most important part of the structure of a story, the thing that grounds it, the reason why they matter, which circles back to our first question today. Why are they important? And why are stories important? Stories are important because of the themes that drive them. This is a word that I spend a lot of time working on in my own work. When I sit down to tell a story, it's really easy to find a plot. It's really easy to find a story that's interesting. And you don't have to do much but just talk to the person next to you and you'll probably find out that they have a great story about their life. But why are you telling it? Why are you, the storyteller, going to sit down and endeavor at that computer or with that pen and paper or with that camera or with that microphone or whatever vessel of storytelling you're going to use? Why are you going to tell that story? And that's a question that you have to be able to answer. And that is the seed of a theme. And what is a theme? It is the emotional thrust of your story. It is why you're showing up to tell that story. What about that story is meaningful for you? And you have to look inside for that. You have to introspect. And it's been said many times, many different ways, that any life worth leading is one worth exploring. In fact, life is only worth living if you explore it. And of course, as much as we want to maybe see celluloid dreams, as much as maybe we want to experience other people's narratives, ultimately, the only one that we could ever truly behold and know is our own. And this is what makes thematic storytelling so beautiful. Is that when you reach inside yourself and you find something meaningful here, then you want to bring that out and share it with people. And it's not about how many tickets it sells and how much money it makes. It's about the fact that up on that screen, real life is happening. That the fiction blurs and makes its way right across this floor into those seats, where finally in your life that moment of art touches you and causes you to feel, causes you to think, causes you to cry, causes you to hope and dream. Because when we flick on the news, when we look at our apps, we know that things aren't great out there. It doesn't take much to see that the world's in a bit of trouble at the moment. But we still, more than ever before, need thematic story. We need thematic storytellers. We need people who are brave and courageous to share their dreams, their thoughts, their hopes, their fears, their pain, their hurt. We cannot be afraid to open ourselves up to the entire spectrum of the emotional experience that it is to be human. Why? Because we're all feeling it. And when we feel it in isolation is when we fail each other. Storytelling isn't important because it makes money. Storytelling isn't important because it makes stars. Storytelling is important because it is the communication of the entire human experience. And you, my friends, belong to that. Behold that. Internalize that. And in the earlier panel today, these wonderful colleagues were up here talking about startups and venture capital, and they were really at it, and it was fascinating to listen to their conversation. But ultimately, what all of them circled back to was the founder. And in their world, the founder is the author. And that passion that drives him or her, that brings him or her each day to their work, to, I think Mohawk said, chew glass, work 7 to 11, like Ash said, right? You know, folks, that passion is the same passion that writers, filmmakers, cinematographers, theater makers have. But I want to assure you, you have it too. And how do I know that? Because your life is meaningful to you. Now, does that mean that you all have to write a screenplay and go cast Mammootty in your next film? I hope it happens for you. Call me if you need a director, okay? But what I mean to say is this, is that tell your story. Pick up that pen, switch on that computer, and start writing. Oh, but Jeff, it's not going to be good. Who said it had to be? Since when is good the only thing that matters? And who decides anyway? We live in this world of social media and likes and thumbs up. You know, when I was a kid, if someone called you a follower, you'd get beat up, right? A feed was something you put on a cow's face to give him food. When did it become okay to follow, lead, tell your story? Because it's the only one that matters the most. And stop judging yourself in the process. As the second part of my talk, as requested for my friends here, let's talk a little bit about something really wonderful that's happening here, right here in Kerala. And it really is with a tremendous amount of respect that I say this to you, that your film industry, it's very fitting that we're in a cinema, isn't it? That your film industry has taken the lead, really taken the lead in the pan-Indian film movement, because people have come to understand that a film from this part of the world will have a great story, good acting, and be put together well. And let's talk about why that's true. Let's talk about why that happened. Let's analyze that a little bit, because certainly maybe the budgets aren't as big as what you see in Hindi cinema or Telugu cinema or Tamil cinema for that matter. But what has driven this is actually the same thing we were speaking about earlier. Narrative storytelling. Themes that connect with the people. Now you may wonder, why is this the case? And I assure you, everybody in Mumbai wonders too. Now, of course, people are going to talk about finances, they're going to talk about budgets, they're going to talk about actors, they're going to talk about cameras, they're going to talk about themes, they're going to talk about all of these things under the sun. And I've questioned everybody. As a matter of fact, I spent 2 years after the pandemic asking everybody why films weren't working in the Hindi commercial film space. And I got every answer under the sun, and every answer, as far as I could tell, was correct. But as a writer-director, I look at it from a different angle. And the angle I see this from is actually to do with writing. And let me explain. There is still a great tradition of Malayalam literature. People still read here in your language. You still have a great tradition of theater here in your language. And that great tradition of literature and very alive theater gives young writers and young directors and young actors an opportunity to essay, try their craft week in and week out. It gives them an opportunity to learn the skills and the scaffolding of storytelling. That's not to suggest that in the Hindi space we don't have amazing writers, because certainly we do. We have brilliant writers in Hindi. And certainly we have brilliant stories in Hindi. I don't mean to compare, but the fact is that the Hindi theater scene is not as strong as it used to be. This is something that people whom I work with in the theater talk about constantly. And it's something that we're all aware of. And that revolution is something that we hope to start. But one of the lessons we can take from you good people here in Kerala is this wonderful commitment to your language. Because language is how we communicate. You know, it's a very interesting thing as you grow and you start to learn new languages. In my case, I learned French as an adult. I assure you that's absolutely a miracle because I'm not gifted for languages at all. But as you start to learn languages, you start to realize that certain words, certain phrases, and certain expressions exist in that language, not just because they're part of a different culture, because they express something that only that culture feels. And when you watch cinema from Kerala, you can feel the authenticity of that tradition. You can feel the warmth of that culture. You can feel the commitment to craft in the writing. And this is why I genuinely believe what has grounded your cinema and what it has brought it to this incredible level where it's really being regarded not just in India, but globally, is this wonderful tradition and absolute total commitment to the language of Malayalam. So, just to resume my talk and wind this down for all of you, tell your stories. If you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're a founder, if you're a father, if you're a mother, if you're a sister, a brother, or a cousin, a cat, a dog, tell your story. Why? Because it's yours. And fill that story with all that is your life. Fill that story with all that is your dreams. Fill that story with the one thing, the absolutely singularly most important thing that ties it all together. Love. Treat it with love. Bring hope back into the conversation. A word that I spend a lot of time thinking about, that I often feel is missing in the conversation of story and, well, just generally speaking, is a word that I hope all of us can meditate upon. Humanity. We don't use that word anymore. What a beautiful word, right? Humanity. And it sums it all up. Suddenly all of our different beliefs, all of our different colors and different religions, all of our differences vanish in the face of that word. Maybe that's why we don't use it anymore. I'm not so sure. But I can tell you this, that what makes your story universal is your humanity. And as I leave you, I just want to leave you with 3 things that I share with my acting students, my directing students, my writing students all the time. Words have meanings, yes, but they also have inferences. And the inferences sometimes are positive and negative connotations. Well, here are 3 words that have a negative connotation, and I'd like you to relearn them, or like I often say to my students, unlearn them. Shall we do this together? Vulnerable. Sensitive. And naive. Everybody thinks that if you're vulnerable, sensitive, and naive, you can be taken advantage of, you cry all the time, and you must be a dimwit. When in fact, all they really mean, if you are vulnerable, it means you feel. You are open to feeling. Show me someone who doesn't feel, and I will show you a liar. Sensitive. All it means is that you do feel. And we all feel. We may not all express it the same way. Don't confuse expression for feeling. And finally, naive. All naive means to me is you don't know everything. And that is so beautiful. Isn't that the most important part of life, is not to know everything? You know, today we have a big problem with conversation because we don't talk to each other anymore. We talk at each other. So unlearn those words and tell your stories. Read, write, get to the theater, get to the cinema, and please continue to support artists of all kinds, because we need you far more than you know. Audiences, you are the biggest single part of what we do. We think about you more than we think about ourselves, which is saying a lot because actors tend to be very narcissistic. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.